failed. Number 9. The likeness between Abraham and Brahma and between their wives and histories was observed by Dr. Hyde. Indeed, it is so marked that to miss observing it is impossible. Of course, he supposes that all the immense fabric of Hindu superstition was derived from the man, Abraham. In palliation of this absurdity, it must be recollected that in the time of Hyde, the nature of the Hindu history and religion was not at all known. But seeing the striking similarity between the doctrines of the Hindus and those of the Christians and Jews, he pronounces that Brahma was Abraham. Postellus, in Commentario ad Jezera, had long before asserted the same thing, and that the Brahmins were the descendants of the patriarch by his wife Ketura, and were so called quasi-Abrahmanes. This doctrine is supported by the Arabian historians who contend that Brahma and Abraham, their ancestor, are the same person. Dr. Hyde in Prideaux, receiving the likeness between the Persians and Jews, supposed Zoroaster to have been of the Jewish religion. They were certainly so far right that the two nations were of the same religion. I have already observed that the Persians generally call Abraham Ibrahim Zarathustra. Hyde says, Persarum religio in multis. Hyde, in his first chapter, shows that the ancient Persians had a sacred fire precisely the same as the Jews, from which it did not differ in any respect, and that the reverence to, or adoration of, this fire was exactly the same as that of the Jews to theirs, from which he says the Persians copied it. He quotes Ezra to show that Cyrus considered the religion of the Jews the same as his own. For proofs of the truth of this theory, my reader may refer back to Book 2, Chapter 4. It is admitted that Abraham and Brahma are the same. Therefore, the Hindus must have come from Abraham, or the Israelites of Brahma. Now, Christian reader, look to the Pentateuch, which you cannot dispute, and you will see the whole history of circumcision, and how and why it was first adopted by Abraham for all his descendants. And if the Brahmins had descended from him, they would certainly have had this right. But in no part of India is this right observed by the Brahmins. This at once proves that Abraham came from the Brahmins, if either came from the other. Sir W. Jones, in his translation of the Institutes of Manu, renders the word Brahmana in the sense of priest, and the Jesuit Robert de Nobilibus, in what have been said to be his forged Vedas, calls the high priest of the Jews and his associates Yuda Brahmana. That is, the words being in Rajamin, Brahmin of the holy Hae. I suspect that in mystic words like Yuda, the last syllable meaning ending in D and A, thou, always means holy, or has the meaning of the Latin divus. The expression of the Jesuit shows that he considered the word Yuda to be the same as the name of the tribe of Abraham. Mr. Here below, Bibliot Orient article Behavior calls Abraham Yoigis, from the word yogis. Our word Jews may probably have come. I beg the reader to pronounce aloud the word Geogis. The Sanskrit word Ayudhya becomes the English Oyub, in Javanese Nayubya, and in Dutch, still more barbarously, de Joju. Here we arrive very nearly at the words Jude and Jew, as is apparent on pronouncing the words, and here it is found in the island of Java, the mother or sister of the island of Bali, which contains a place called Madura, the same as Mathura or Mutra of Upper India, where the statue of Balarama and Krishna so often before noticed is found. The island of Java is the island of Iowa, or Jehovah. Okay, so we're going to bust down into this chapter 2 real quick, see what's going down in this thing, because it's talking about some black Jews. So, like, what? We have, number 1, we have seen the dove is a peculiar manner, the emblem of the Aoni. With this, we find the Jews at almost perpetual war. The Assyrians are constantly described in the Jewish books by the term sword of the oppressor. In several In several places where we find this, it ought to be rendered the sword of the dove. This was the emblem or crest or coat of arms carried by the followers of the imaginary or at least mystical Semiramis, who was said to have been born or near the Philistine Iona or the Semirama Isi of India, of whom I shall presently treat. See Colonel Wilford's essay on Semiramis. Persons may have different opinions as to the cause of the dove, or Kapotaswari, becoming the emblem of the female generative power, as also of the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. But the fact cannot be disputed. The Chaldeans, or Chazdim, or Chaldees, were priests of the Assyrians and worshippers of the dove or female generative power, whence they called their sacred isle of the west Iona or Columba, that is, the female dove, not the male, or Columbus. And remember too, Columba, right? The dove constellation. No person who has studied the Romish hagiographa can doubt of the origin of the bishops Iona and Columba. Number 2, the Reverend Dr. Claudius Buchanan, I believe a missionary, some years ago published travels in India in which he states that he found no less than 65 settlements of black Jews in different parts of the peninsula. It is a great pity that these different races of people could not be examined by a philosopher. Dr. Buchanan, who found the Christians of St. Thomas before they were what he would call corrupted by the Romish Church to have been and yet be correct Lambeth Christians, notwithstanding that they received the gospel of the infancy and were Nestorians, could not be expected to discover much. These black Jews are remnants of the sect of Iudas, who, Colonel Wilford informs us, yet remained in Gujarat. I apprehend that they were part of a sect of the Linga, who would not unite with, or divided from, the followers of the female principle, the Argha, or Ioni, or from those of the double principle, and, on that account, were persecuted and expelled. And from them came the tribe of Abram, or the Brahmin. If this were the case, they would not, of course, have all the Mosaic books in the form in which we have them, except they received them from the West. If this were the case, they would not, of course, have all the Mosaic books in the form in which we have them, except they received them from the West. And this seems rationally to account for the places in Syria being called by names of places in India. We know how almost all immigrants have given the names of countries of their births to their new habitations. Jeremiah Jones says, quote, Mr. La Crosse, in a letter dated at Berlin, the 4th of the Ideas of December 1718 supposes it, i.e. the Gospel of the Infancy, written by some person who was an historian, because in a synod called Diam Parana, held by Alexius de Menezes, Archbishop of Goa, in the Diocese of Augamala, in the mountainous country of Malabar, in the year of Christ 1559, he found it thus condemned. The book, which is titled Of the Infancy of Our Savior, or the History of Our Lady, already condemned by the ancient saints, because it contains many blasphemies and heresies, and many fabulous stories without foundation, etc. Instances of which are produced in that synod, the same as are in Dr. Sykes' Gospel, and it is there said that it was commonly read among the Nestorians in Malabar, unquote. Now we're going to check out this footnote real quick. Okay, so it says that of Brennus the Celt, our barbarian ancestor, was accompanied by a circumstance which appears trifling, but which exhibits a proof of the great antiquity of our practice of bearing devices or coats of arms. Nimrod, Volume 1, page 178, says, quote, the confusion fell upon the army at the closing in of the evening, and at first a few only were confounded in mind, who imagined they heard the tramp of horses and the onset of some enemy, and in a little time this alienation possessed the minds of them all, and taking up arms and dividing among themselves, they mutually destroyed one another, no longer understanding their own native tongue, nor yet recognizing the countenances of each other, nor the devices on their shields. Continuing on, from an observation which Mr. Jones has made respecting the Marcosians, a branch of the Gnostics, and respecting a passage of Arrhenius already noticed, I think it is unquestionable that the gospel of the infancy existed in the 2nd century. There is also existing part of a gospel called the Gospel of Thomas, which is evidently taken from the same source as that of the infancy, and St. Thomas is said to have instructed the Indians. The extract from Jones shows that if what Buchanan says be true, that the opinions of the Malabar Christians are the same as the present English Protestants, they must have surprisingly changed since the arrival among them of the Portuguese. It seems remarkable that the Portuguese Baptists should have converted these Nestorians into Protestants. It is, to me, utterly incredible that any tribe of people existing as a tribe should exist as Mosaic Jews without the Pentateuch, because the Pentateuch forms their bond of union. It is not only their religious, but it is their civil code, which regulates the decisions of their judges in disputes about the common affairs of life. If they ever were Jews, they must once have possessed the Pentateuch, and they must have lost it, which seems incredible, when it must always have been in the daily use by the judges. I believe the case to be this, that they were tribes of Yahudi or Yadu, which were spared when opposing sects got the better of them in the wars of the Mahabharata, and were left in a poor and miserable state without books or literature, spared, in fact, from mere contempt, being too low to excite fear or anger, that in the course of many generations their origin was forgotten. In meeting with Jews from the West and comparing notes, they found a near relationship and accounted for it by supposing that they must have come from Western Syria, in consequence of the revolutions which had taken place there. Their real history, in 2,000 years and upwards, might well be forgotten. The ancient, and you know what's so funny about that? Is that's literally what has happened here with so-called African Americans here in America. Like, straight up. 100%, like to the T. You think if they was writing this, and if he was writing this in 1836, that some governmental agency or group of people got together and said that this was the ultimate plan as well and made it work? I mean, come on, wouldn't you do that to gain all power and control? The ancient civil religious wars of India are recorded in the books of the Brahmins, but they are totally forgotten among the masses of the people. From the accounts given by Dr. Buchanan of the black tribes, some of them having Pentateuchs and others not having them, and of those who have them having obtained them from the white tribes, it seems probable that they are indebted for them solely to the white tribes. Dodge the hijack, watch out now. This will exactly agree, as might be expected with my theory, if it should turn out to be true, because going out of the tribe of Judai, or Ayudai, from India, in all probability, Hayudi, must have taken place before Moses lived and before he partly wrote and partly compiled or collected the tracts into what we now call the Pentateuch. In all probability, the first books of Genesis were brought from India with the tribe, with Abraham, or the Brahmin. The more I meditate on the extraordinary fact stated by Buchanan that there are many black tribes of what are called in our language Jews, but evidently tribes of Ayudi, in different parts of India, who have not the Pentateuch of Moses, the more extraordinary and important it appears. The Pentateuch is the civil law of the Jews, but what law do these tribes govern themselves? It is by tradition. If they be Jews, they must be descendants of Jacob or Abraham, which branched off before the law was given. You hear that? And if their law be very well similar to that of the present Ayudi, it will prove, what indeed seems pretty clear without it, that Moses adopted in his written law many of the old laws which his tribe had before. Eusebius in his Chronicon says that Ethiopians coming from the Indus or Black River settled near Egypt. There seems to be nothing improbable in these Ethiopians being the tribe of Jews, the tribe of Jacob or Israel. I think these Ethiopians did come under Jacob and did settle in Goshen, and gave the names of Maturia and Avaris to the city in which they dwelt. Avari in Hebrew would be as often written Obri, or the city of the Hebrews or foreigners. The city of the Hebrews or foreigners. They not from there. It's not where they originate. Even though we talking about some good stuff with the Ethiopians, they still foreigners. It can scarcely be maintained that the places in Egypt which have names connected with the word Judah can have been called in that early day from that tribe of the Jews. But if it be, I then ask how the name Solomon, which is found in the desert of Salome, etc., is to be accounted for. Taken together, the two exhibit the general Judean mythos, independently of the tribe of Jacob or Israel. Eusebius's assertion in his Chronicon by Scaliger that about the year BC 1575 a tribe of Ethiopians came from the river Indus and encamped and settled in Egypt is but a loose kind of information and therefore can be little depended on, but as he fixes them to about the time when the Jews are generally supposed to have come, it rather tends to confirm my idea, though I pay little attention to the dates, knowing that chronology's messed up. It is not impossible that without knowing it, he may allude to the Jewish tribe. But if this evidence be only weak, I will now produce what will not be easily overthrown. Number 3. Megasthenes, who was sent to India by Seleucus Nicator about 300 years before Christ, and whose accounts from new inquiries are every day acquiring additional credit in a very remarkable manner, confirms my hypothesis of the Jews coming from India. He says that they were an Indian tribe or sect called Kalani, and that their theology was a great resemblance to that of the Indians. The discovery of this passage, after I have written what the reader has read respecting the Jews, gave me no little pleasure, because it almost proves the truth of my theory and is very different from founding my theory upon it. I will now produce another proof. If records by unwilling witness are proofs, for Josephus is an unwilling witness. Aristotle gave an account of the Jews that they came from the Indian philosophers, and that they were called by the Indians Galami, and by the Syrians Judei. I think few persons will doubt that the Galamai here are the Kalani of Megasthenes, one of the two being miscalled. We have seen a Kalani in Salon, where we found a Zion, Adam's Foot, Mount Ararat, and Colombo, etc., and in Genesis and Amos, a Kalne or Kalani is also named. Gale has observed that the information of Megasthenes is confirmed by Clearchus, the peripatetic. I think in this question these Grecian authorities constitute good evidence. Thus, for my hypothesis, we have a good written evidence as can be expected. We will presently try to confirm it by circumstances. Respecting Megasthenes, Colonel Wilford says, quote, Megasthenes, a man of no ordinary abilities who had spent the greatest part of his life in India and a public character as well, and was well acquainted with the chronological systems of the Egyptians, Chaldeans, and Jews, made particular inquiries into their history and declared, according to Clement of Alexandria, that the Hindus and Jews were the only people who had the true idea of the creation of the world and the beginning of things. From these circumstances, Colonel Wilford draws the conclusion that there was an obvious affinity between the chronological systems of the Hindus and the Jews, and they have an obvious tendency to support my theory of the origin of the Jewish tribe. In the formal part of this work, I have noticed an assertion of Megasthenes that the Jews and Indians were the only people who had a true notion of chronology, and have almost most clearly proved that what he said was true, or at least that their chronologies were the same. If I had desired to invent a piece of information in confirmation of what I had said respecting the immigration of the Israelitish tribe from India to Syria, I could not have had anything better than the following passage from Colonel Wilford. The Zohar Manasseh, which the reader will find named, cannot, in this case, be disputed as evidence of the ancient, probably the secret or esoteric opinion of the Jews. The 7 earths, one above another, is a circumstance so totally inapplicable to Jerusalem, and so clearly Hindu, that the identity of the two cannot be mistaken. Wilford says, quote, Meru, with its 3 peaks on the summit and its 7 steps, includes and encompasses really the whole world, according to the notions of the Hindus and other nations, previously to their being acquainted with the globular shape of the earth. I mentioned in the first part of the Jews were acquainted with the 7 stages, zones, or dvipas of the Hindus. But I have since discovered a curious passage from the Zohar Manasseh on the creation as cited by Basnage in his History of the Jews. There are, says the author, 7 earths, whereof one is higher than the other. For Judea is situated upon the highest earth, and Jerusalem upon the highest mountain of Judea. This is the hill of God, so often mentioned in the Old Testament, the mount of the congregation where the mighty king sits in the sides of the north, according to Isaiah. And there is the city of our God. The Meru of the Hindus has the name of Sabha, or the congregation, and the gods are seated upon it in the sides of the north. There is the holy city of Brahmapuri, where resides Brahma with his court, in the most pure and holy land of Ilavrata. The Judea, or Ayudhya, and Jerusalem named above are evidently compared to the North Pole and Mount Meru. The North Pole and Mount Meru. The North Pole and Mount Meru, which is thus called the place of Audi. We shall presently find that the Arabians, the pole star, was called the Star of Audi. The following passages from the Bible are very striking. Now check this out. That pole star don't ever move. Look it up. It's called Polaris. We talked about that. Beautiful for a situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion, and this is coming from the Bible, is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. The mountain of the house of the Lord shall be established in the top of the mountains. Then Solomon began to build the house of the Lord at Jerusalem in Mount Moriah, where the Lord appeared unto David his father. For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will dwell in the midst of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem shall be called the city of truth, and the mountain of the Lord of hosts, the holy mountain. When we consider that our Bible is merely the sacred writings of the temple upon this mountain of Zion, or Moriah, or Meru, the exaggeration above is only what we might expect to find in them. Thus, the Indians say that the same of their Meru. I think it probable that all these mounts were imitative of the heavenly Jerusalem, described in the last 2 chapters of the very ancient work called Apocalypse. I think if my reader will look back to the preceding pages, he will number 4. He will now observe several circumstances, particularly respecting the Solomon, which will tend strongly to confirm an opinion to which I have come after the most patient investigation that the Israelites were one of the tribes which immigrated from the country of the Afghans or Rajputs, that is, from the east, to avoid persecution. This is, indeed, in substance the account given by Moses. They were, in fact, a sect which worshipped the male generative principle in opposition to the female. The circumstances relating to the city of Jerusalem and the Solomon will be found to be very striking and will show clearly why we meet with a Mount Zion in India and with another in Syria. But though I think attachment to the adoration of the male principle, or at least the double principle in opposition to the female singly, or to Ionism or Hellenism, was one reason for their immigration, I also think it probable that dislike to the adoration of the bull was another. So, if Solomon of Syria, the wise, were a Buddha, one of the 14 Solomon, or 14 Manus, or 14 Mahabads, all supposed to be incarnations of divine wisdom, we see why he was so celebrated for that virtue. He was the son of the shepherd, Dud, who was the son of Asi, who was the son of Aub. I think Dud was a corruption of Yud, as Aeacus became Bacchus, Ionius, Dionys, Zeus, Deus, Zankl, Dankel, or Dankul, Zankle. Isi is the male, Isis of India. Aub is Sarasi, Obad, or Abad, i.e. the Buddha. The Persians had a title, Salaman, equivalent to the Greek, and implying universal cosmocrator. and Thamurath aspired to this rank, but the divine Argeng, in whose gallery were the statues of the 72 Salimans, contended with him for the supremacy. This Argeng was the head of the League of, and the number 72 is that of the kings subject to the King of Kings. This seems like, right here, this whole passage might be like some secret society shit too as well. Like, I ain't gotta highlight it, but it does. The history of Solomon bears a very mythological appearance, which is much confirmed by a passage in Strabo, who asserts that both Syria and Phoenicia had their names from India. He says, speaking from the eruption of the Greeks of the Seleucidae into India, these same Greeks subjugated the country as far as the territory of Syri and Phani. Phani? What? What is that? Causebon supposed the Phanin of Strabo to mean Phoenicon, and so corrected. What? Nah, Phanin? Canaan? I don't know. This shows that there were nations of these names in India, which could not be very far from the peninsula of Sarastrene, or Sarastrene, or perhaps Rajaputana, or Afghanistan. The word Rajaputana, I think, is Rajaputana, or three words which mean the country of the royal Buddha, Paut being one of the names of Buddha. That Rajad is royal, I shall show by and by. Of Afghan, I can make nothing, but in the travels of Ibn Battuta, there is a place mentioned near Delphi, called Afghanpur. The following passage I did not notice till I had written the whole, which the reader has seen respecting the tribe of Audai. I consider this under these circumstances a very valuable circumstantial evidence. This kind of coincidence I value more than direct authorities. Some of the ancient fathers, from terms ill understood, divided the first ages into 3 or more epochas, and have distinguished them by as many characteristics. Barbarismus, which is supposed to have preceded the flood. Scythismus, of which I have been speaking, and Hellenismus, or the Grecian period. This last must appear as extraordinary as any, for how was it possible for the Hellenic era to have existed before the name of Hellas was known, or the nation in being? I suppose the reader, after having read what I have said relating to the Ionians, does not require to answer the question. To this Mr. Brandt adds in a note, in like manner of the fourth heresy is supposed to have arisen styled Judaismus before the time of either the Jews or Israelites, unquote. Here the tribe of Yadu or Judai or Ayud, of which I have treated, is evident, which these fathers could not help seeing, but of which they could not understand the origin or meaning. Number 6. The existence of Ionian or Hellenistic heresy, as well as in its antiquity, is clearly recognized by several of the fathers. Eusebius says, Sirach was the first who introduced the false worship called Hellenismus. Epiphanius says, Rajim or Ragan had for his son Saruk when idolatry and Hellenismus first began among men. Johannes Antiochus styles the people of Midian Hellenes, and speaking of Moses, who married the daughter of Jethro the Cuthite, the priest of Midian, who represents the woman as the daughter of Jothar, the high priest of Hellenes. The introduction or adoption of Hellenism or Ionism by Sirach several generations before Abraham is as much in favor of my hypothesis as anything can be. Then right here he says, Mr. Franklin says, another striking instance is recorded by the very intelligent traveler Wilson regarding a representation of the fall of our first parents, sculpted in the magnificent temple of Ipsambul in Nubia. He says that that's so funny too, Ipsambul, okay? In Nubia. He says that a very exact representation of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden is to be seen in that cave, and that the serpent climbing around the tree is especially delineated, and the whole subject of the tempting of our first parents most accurately exhibited. How is this fact of the mythos of the second book of Genesis being found in Nubia, probably 1,000 miles above Heliopolis, to be accounted for, except that it came from Upper India? See, he's not getting it yet. He don't know. With the first Buddhist, or Gymnosophists. There, they were found by Clemens Alexandrinus, and there they founded a Meru called Meroe. The same mythos is found in India. Colonel Todd says a drawing brought by Colonel Combs from a sculptured column in a cave temple in the south of India represents the first pair at the foot of the ambrosial tree, and a serpent entwined among the heavenly laden boughs, presenting them from some fruit from his mouth. The tempter appears to be at part of his discourse, when, replete with guile, into her heart to ease the entrancements one fixed on the fruit she gazed. Throughout all the ancient world, the distinction between the followers of Yoni and Linga may be seen. All nations seem to have been Ionians except the Jews and the Persians, and as the Jewish or male principle prevailed, the other declined. There's two, androgynous, the male and the female side. That's what we've been talking about recently. So that's the chapters I wanted to go through on that one with y'all real quick. Right? So now we finna get up out of this bad boy, and we finna be in volume 2. Okay, so we finna get in this thing for real. Volume 2 is not playing, y'all. It's not playing at all. It's actually pretty wild. So let's get going, alright? So Lord Kingsborough on Mexico. And just a whole bunch of information. I don't even need to read it. Let's go. Number 1, I must now draw, and again, this is volume 2 of Godfrey Higgins' Anacalypsis. I must now draw my reader's attention to perhaps the most curious of all the subjects hitherto discussed, and that is the history of Mexico and Peru. It might be supposed that these, of all nations, were the least likely to afford any useful information respecting the system or mythos which I have been unveiling, but they are, in fact, rich in interesting circumstances that have hitherto been totally inexplicable, but which are easily explained on the hypothesis that there was, in very early times, a universal empire governed by a learned priesthood. Where'd it start at, baby? Yeah. Many months after the Anacalypsis had been in the press, Lord Kingsborough's magnificent work on Mexico made its appearance. This will account for the manner in which I have spoken of Mexican hieroglyphics in the first volume. It's so weird that it says that. I'm kind of confused on this. My reader will readily believe me when I say it was with great pleasure I discovered in every part of the work circumstances which can only be accounted for in the theory laid down by me, and which therefore confirm it in a very remarkable manner. You see what I'm saying? He laid down the theory showing that there was migration or movement differing from what was being projected or put forth, and now that Lord Kingsborough's books come out, it's all coming together. It's all coming together. Now he finally get it. All those things he didn't get, it's now coming together. And here we go. This is what we getting from it. His lordship's difficulties are very striking. The language of the Jews, their mythos, laws, customs are everywhere apparent. This his lordship accounts for by supposing that in ancient times colonies of Jews went to America from Alexandria. But this is by no means accounts for the difficulty, because the Trinity, the crucifixion, and other doctrines of Christianity are intermixed with every part of the Jewish rites, which must be accounted for. Therefore, to remove this new difficulty, he is obliged to suppose that Christian missionaries in the early times of the gospel found their way to America. Now, admitting this to have taken place, its insufficiency to account for the various incomprehensible circumstances, if not already, will very shortly be clearly proved. The South Americans had not the knowledge of letters when the Spaniards arrived among them, nor did they know of the use of iron. These facts are of themselves almost enough to prove, and really do prove, when combined with other circumstances, that the Jewish customs and doctrines could not have been carried to them from Alexandria, as above suggested, or by modern Christians, who would have instantly set them to digging their mountains. But, on the contrary, these facts prove that the colonization must have taken place previous to the discovery of iron by the natives of the Old World, long before Alexandria was built, and this agrees very well with their ignorance of the use of an alphabet. These two facts exhibit the mythos in existence at a period extremely remote indeed, for the identity of rites such as circumcision, etc., found in India, Syria, Egypt, and South America puts the great antiquity and identity of these mythoses out of all doubt. Number 2. David Macomb, in his book called Antiquities of Britain, which is so ingeniously contrived that it cannot be referred to by chapter, number, page, or in any other way, gives the following passage as an extract from Solomon's Modern History. St. Austin, speaking of the notion some entertained of another continent, he says, "It is not agreeable to reason or good sense to affirm that men may pass over so great an ocean as the Atlantic from this continent to a new-found world, or that there are inhabitants there, all men being descended from the first man, Adam." I don't agree with that, but okay. Now, this shows that from the time of Christ to the 4th century, when the African bishop lived, but then resided at Rome, there had been no colonization. It was impossible to have taken place without his knowledge, and this absolutely proves the truth of the existence of the mythos before the time of Christ. The jealousy of the Pope and the court of Spain in keeping all strangers away from South America, even to the extreme length, for many years, of excluding their own bishops and secular clergy, and permitting no priests but Dominicans and Franciscans to go thither, is accounted for. So you see right there, he talking about like, yo, they wasn't letting nobody come over here for quite a while. Like, nobody. They knew what was up, and they had to eliminate that before they could start, at least what they, it was, hey, they were like, wait, what's going on? Why can't we, The clear and unquestionable doctrines of Judaism and Christianity, which must have existed before the time of Christ, evidently overthrew all their vulgar, esoteric doctrines, whatever they might do with the esoteric, or those in the conclave. Lord Kingsborough says, but one solution offers itself from all the difficulties and mysteries which seem to be inseparable from the study of the ancient monuments, paintings, and mythology of the Mexicans, and that is, the presence of the Jews in the New World. Had his lordship said the Judaic mythos, he would have been right, for nothing can be more clear than that it is all substantially there, and most intimately mixed, actually amalgamated, he might have added, with the Christian. Now what's amazing is you're seeing here, this is the volume 2 Anacalypsis. You see how much has changed now. You're already noticing how much he sees how it all links. Let's keep going. So number 3, the similarity between the Jews, the Christians, and the South Americans is sufficiently striking, but there is yet something to me still more so, which is that several of the doctrines which I have advocated in this work, unknown to the vulgar Jews and Christians of this day, are to be found in Mexico. Their triune God, their creator, is called by the names of Yahweh and Hom. Lord Kingsborough says, quote, Hom Eoka, which signifies the place in which exists the creator of the universe, or the first cause, to whom they gave the name of Hom Etuli, which means the God of threefold dignity, or three gods, the same as Ol Hombres, and by another name, Hom Mekan, that is to say, the place of the Holy Trinity, which, according to the opinion of many of their old men, begot by the word Sipatenal, and a woman called Shiyumio. In the Homeoka, when joined with the other circumstances, I cannot but recognize the and Ia place of Hom, and again in Hom Iakan, the Ania, the place or country of the self-existent, who is called the Trinity. And what are we to make of the Hom, the Father of the Word, by the Logos? The Father of the American Trinity is called Ekuturki, o bien, o Ragos, o Riso. Here, the of North India, the Urus, or Bive, and the Piru, Pirua, Piru, that is, the Ru, Ra, are distinct. These have evidently not come from modern Christianity, but from the ancient system, the most ancient of times. Teotl is repeatedly said to mean God. Sahagún says the Mexicans had a god, the same as Bacchus, called Emeteuchtli. Ometeuchtli. Here is clearly Bacchus by his name, who is called, which equals 608, which was the name of Jesus Christ, called the desire of all nations, the Nual of Isaiah. Here in the Teut, we have not only of the Greeks, but we have the Teutates of the British Druids, and the Thoth of Egypt, and the Buddha of India under this name, Tat. But it is expressly said in several other places that the god was called Yao. How can anyone doubt that here are the remains of an ancient system, the ancient system, the original before it got branched off into everything else, y'all? Can't you see? Now they see. How can anyone believe that the Jews would carry all these recondite matters to Mexico, even if they did go at any time, and that they would amalgamate them all together as we have them here? He's saying, how could they carry everything that they did and develop it if it was not already been developing from time immemorial? You see what I'm saying? Like, it had always been here. It's where it originated. That's how deep it goes. All these matters. You see what I'm saying? The Mexican history gives a long account of their arrival in Mexico from a distant country far to the west. The stations where the colony rested from time to time during its long migration, which took many years, are particularly described, and it is said that ruins of the towns which they occupied are to be seen in several places along the coast. See, they always do it on the coast, but they ain't looking up and going straight back to the mound builders, you dig? They ain't going up that Mississippi, but maybe it's because they were going up a coast. You see what I'm saying? But the whole landmass was different and flooded with a whole bunch of more seas. I think it is evident that this migration from the west is merely a mythos. So okay, there we go. Well, hey, appreciate you. The circumstances are such to render it totally incredible. In principle, it is the same as that of the Jews, but accommodated the circumstances of the New World. It really seems impossible to read Lord Kingsborough's notes in page 241 and not to see that the mythos of a chosen people and a God conducting them after long migrations to a promised land, attributed by the Spanish monks to the contrivance of the devil, was common to Jews, Christians, and Mexicans. I think it seems clear from page 186 that Mexico, or Mexico, was the Hebrew Meshi. Then it would be the country of the Messiah, or it might equally be the country of the leader, whom we call Moses, of the people of whom we have found in western Syria, in South India, and Kashmir. His lordship shows that the word Mesitli, or Mexico, is precisely the same as the Hebrew word Meshi, or anointed, and that one of these gods should sit on the right hand of the other. In the next page he says, the full accomplishment of the prophecy of a Savior in the person of Quetzalcoatl has been acknowledged by the Jews in America. The temptation of Quetzalcoatl, the fast of 40 days, ordained by the Mexican ritual, the cup with which he was presented to drink, the reed, which was his sign, the morning star, which he has designated, the teparo, or stone, which was laid on his altar, and called Dio Tecparo, or divine stone, which was likewise an object of adoration. All these circumstances, connected with many others relating to Quetzalcoatl, which are here omitted, are very curious and mysterious. But why are they omitted by his lordship? The pious monks accounted for all these things by the agency of the devil and burnt all the hieroglyphic books containing them whenever it was in their power. This migration of the Mexicans from the west, or if we really want to get it right, from the north, is evidently exactly similar to the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt. The going out with great noise and clamor is a part of the mythos. Nimrod was shown that it is to be found among the Greeks in their Bacchic festivals, and also among the Romans. See his second volume, article Populi Fugia. The meaning of the mythos I cannot even suspect, and the nonsense of Nimrod about Babel and the horrors of gynocracy give no assistance. But the fact of the similarity of the histories proves that it really is a part of the mythos, that is, that the Regia Fugia and the Popula Fugia is part of the mythos. On the religion of the Hindus, and Cambridge Key says, the pristine religion of the Hindus was, I think, that of the most pure and ancient Catholic faith, and the religion of the enlightened few still continues such. They have worshipped a Savior as the Redeemer of the world for more than 4,800 years. The religion of their forefathers they brought with them from the old world, the true old world, and established it in the new one. They believed implicitly in a Redeemer, who they consider. Now, did you hear what he said, though? He said the religion, right here, the religion of their forefathers, and he's talking about of the Hindus' forefathers, they brought with them from the old world and established it in the new one, which was over there. They believe implicitly in a Redeemer, whom they consider as the spirit that moved on the waters of the creation, the God that existed before all worlds. We shall find this in Mexican faith. You see, he's telling you straight up. He's telling you. It all came from America. They finally figured it out at this time. Why are we still playing games with ourselves? This is before they tied it into the mound builders and really figured out what was going on with the mound builders. This is before we found thousands upon thousands of more structures underneath the Amazon forest and all throughout North America, all the ones that's been destroyed. Y'all gotta quit playing with us. This is the true old world. This is the true old land. We continue to find more and more things here before all, and there are deeper in every regard as well. The god who led the Mexicans in their migration was called Teotl, the god of armies. Yao being said to mean army or victory, the very meaning given to it by the Jews. In Sanskrit, scholars tell me, also by the Indians, Deo is said to be Deo, and Titl, a mere termination. But as I have stated, TTL is T300, and TT is in fact the Tat or Buddha of India. Teotl is the same as Tilt and means 650, which as emblem of the Trinitarian God came to mean 3. I believe also that this has a connection in some way with the Tult, probably originally Tult or Tulad, the male organ of a generation. I believe that from this comes our word, Lad. Teotl is the supreme and invisible being. Teotl is the supreme and invisible being. The Tat is the name of the Tartars, who are as often called Tatars, and I am persuaded that the famous Titans were properly Tatans. Many reasons for these matters will be added hereafter. Now, General Valency says the earliest Irish history begins with Cartuelta, which is in the same as the Indo-Scythian Siar Teutli, that is, Kaiser or Caesar, grandsons of Noah, on the banks of the Caspian, 300 years after the flood. Here I suspect that we have the Caesar of Indo-Scythia, or of the Caspian, joined to the Mexican Teutli, or Teotli. You see what they did to ya? You see what they did to ya? The connections are there, he's saying, but what they did is they moved them around. You see? Number 4. In page 216, Mr. Humboldt treats of a nation called Xochimex. Xochimex. This must be Sacamalec, or I should rather say, considering all other circumstances which have seen relating to the Raja Potans and royal shepherds, royal Saxons, for I much suspect they were all the same people. The Marquis Spinetto, in his lectures, have quoted a person called Carli as having deeply studied the origin of nations and languages, and who, he says, has asserted that the Egyptians peopled America. Now it's the other way around, but it's all good. He particularly notices a word as being held sacred among the Egyptians, and in the Pacific Ocean it is the bao. But this is nothing but bauta, red. Anagrammatically, or in fact in the old Hebrew fashion, the high priest of the North American Indians was called Sachem. I think we have here both the Saga and the Acme, and also the Xiakam, which we have before noticed in Tibet. The dignity of sacrificer was supreme and hereditary, like a feudal title. His title was Papa, his dress scarlet, with fringes as a border. This exactly answers to the Sagart and the Rex Sacrificulis of the ancients. The fringes of the Mexicans were fixed to the four corners of their garments as a sacred ordinance, precisely like those of the Jews, and it is only fair to suppose, as they were similar in one respect, they should be so in another, and have been descriptive of the number 600. The number 5. But Bottorini says, no pagan nation refers primitive events to fixed states like the Indians, meaning the Americans. They recount to us the history of the creation of the world, of the deluge, of the confusion of tongues, at the time of the Tower of Babel, of the other epochs and ages of the world, of their ancestors, long travels in Asia, with the years precisely distinguished by their corresponding characters. They record in the year of 7 rabbits, the great eclipse which happened at the crucifixion of Christ our Lord, and the first Indians who were converted to Christianity, who, at that time, were perfectly well acquainted with their own chronology, and applied themselves with the utmost diligence to ours, have transmitted to us the information that from the creation of the world to the happy nativity of Christ 5,199 years have elapsed, which is the opinion or computation of the LLX. One of the periods is 4008 years BC, another is 4801. Their fourth age, the editor says, according to the Mexican symbols, lasted 5206 or 5,206 years, and the early Christian converts made it out 5,199 years. This was evidently the computation of 55,200 years of Eusebius. The period of 4801 is the sum of the 8 ages of the correct Neros. 8 times 600 equals 4,800. The Mexicans are said to be great astrologers. Yeah, we know, buddy, thanks. The Mexicans believed that the millennium would commence at the end of some cycle of 52 years. 4 times 13 equals 52. And they concluded each of these periods with deep lamentations and terrors, and hailed with corresponding joy the moment when the new cycle had commenced, which showed that they had a new 52-year lease. This was exactly the case with the lamentations for the death of Osiris, Adonis, etc., and his resurrection from the tomb. See? So you just saying, oh, well, I think they come from Egypt. Bro, this over here, bro. Like, what? What you talking about? Like, that was over here first? What you mean? The new cycle having commenced, the danger had passed. At first, I doubt not, this was only every 600 years. Afterward, with the increasing uncertainty of the ends of those periods, and also with the increase of superstition, the festivals of Osiris, etc., came, for the sake of security, to be celebrated every year. Lord Kingsborough says the Christians might have feared the return of every period of 52 years as being nearly the anniversary of the age of which Christ had attained when he was crucified, and of the great eclipse which sacred history records, in which, since profane history is silent respecting it, it is very remarkable how the Mexicans should have become acquainted with. Now, did you hear that? It's so funny. Listen, watch this. Christians might have feared the return of every period of 52 cycles as being nearly the anniversary of the age which Christ had attained when he was crucified, and of the great eclipse which the sacred history records, and which, since profane history is silent respecting it, is very remarkable how the Mexicans should have become acquainted with. You see what I'm saying here? So right here, what is he saying? Christ's real age, not given to the profane, is 52. That's why we have a number 7 being so important. Okay? So all those People talking about 33 vertebrae and the Christ. That might just be a hijack that you're putting forth. Possibly. I have to dig on it some more, y'all. That's kind of interesting to me. I've never really come across that. The first pair were called Hue Hue, Wacha, Hue Hue, Tlapala, Kue Ka Kuatu. The first pair, too. That means the first pair of beings were called Hue Hue. Kue Ka Kuatu. That means America, y'all. Old. Hue Hue Tlapalan is America. Kue Ka Kuatu disappeared at the end of 52 years at the great festival in Cholula. Here is the Amphanasia. So, if we really got it where Kue Ka Kuatu disappeared at the end of 52 years, and then you got Jesus disappearing, and apparently his real age was 52 years. That's wild, y'all. That's very wild, and I can see why something like that would be held away from us. First time I've come across it, but we're gonna have to dig on that one. Now, Mr. Humboldt gives nearly the same account. He says, at the end of 52 years, they had a grand festival when all lights were extinguished, and after crucifying a man, they kindled a fire by the friction of the wood of the ivy on his breast, from which they were all relighted. It was their belief that the world would be destroyed at the end of one of these cycles, and as soon as the fire was kindled and the critical moment passed, which assured them that a new cycle was to run, they indulged in the greatest joy. He shows that they new cleaned and furnished all their houses and temples precisely as was done by the ancient Egyptians, and he might have added, as is also done by the Romish Church at every Jubilee. He shows that Mexicans had convents of monks precisely like the Tibetans and the Romish Church. Priests, kings, boy, you better get it right. After this, Humboldt states that Mr. Laplace, from a careful examination, had come to the conclusion that the Mexicans knew the length of the tropical year more correctly than Hipparchus, and almost as correctly as Almanman. And he shows from various astronomical circumstances that they must have had a close connection with the Eastern Asia and its cycles. Humboldt says this predilection for periodical series and the existence of a cycle of 60 years appear to reveal the Tartarian origin of the nations of the new continent. He then states that the cycle of 60 years was divided into 4 parts. These small cycles represented the 4 seasons of the great year. Each of them contained 185 moons, which corresponded with 15 Chinese and Tibetan years, and consequently with the real indictions observed in the time of Constantine. Here we see the identity accounted for of the chronological period stated above by Lord Kingsborough, with those of the Old World as corrected by the 2 Caesars with the assistance of the Chaldeans of the East. On this I shall have something very curious in a future book. Mr. Niebuhr says, what we call Roman numerals are Etruscan and frequently seen on their monuments, but these signs are of the hieroglyphic kind and belong to an earlier mode of symbolical writing. In use before the introduction of alphabetical characters, they resemble the Aztecan in this, and they represent objects individually. They were of native origin at the time when the West, with all its primitive peculiarities, was utterly unknown to the East, at the same period when the Tordetani framed their written characters and language. Here also a phenomenon presents itself which fills us moderns with astonishment, and an exceedingly accurate measurement of time, and even in the cyclical year, quite in the spirit in which the early Mexican legislators conducted the chronology. Portions of time measured off from periods of very long duration, determined with astronomical precision and without regard to the lunar changes. Besides these, the Etruscans had a civil lunar year, which the cyclical only served to correct. But there is something remarkable, and not only to be lightly discarded, in the affinity between the wisdom of the ancient West and the science, at one time perhaps more widely diffused over that hemisphere, and of which the Mexicans still preserve the hereditary, though probably useless possession, at the time when the country was destroyed. This deserves more attentive consideration since the discovery of an analogy between the Basque and the American languages by a celebrated scholar, Professor Batir. In these observations, we purely have a very extraordinary confirmation of my theory. If the Romans calculated by a period of a saeculum of 120 years, they would come to the same conclusions as if they took the 60 or 600, and in this, we see why the Mexican and Roman periods agree in the time of Constantine and Eusebius. They would not have agreed before the time when the solstice was corrected by the Sosigenes, the Chaldean. And when we're talking about the Sosigenes, the Chaldean, now we get into specifics in relation to the wise men that were asked to come or convoked to come to North America, or Huehuetlapalan, to fix the calendar. This exact thing, the solstice. So now what we have done in our research is taking it from knowing that we had astrologers to what it was about, which was the solstice, and then now we have a direct person who is Sosigenes, the Chaldean, okay? And where did he come to? We got records now that's showing that he was convoked to Huehuetlapalan, which is North America, to fix the calendar, y'all. They would have varied more than 500 years. This we shall refer to in a future book. Humboldt says the Mexicans hold that before the flood, which took place 4,800 years after the creation of the world, the earth was inhabited by giants. One of them, after the flood, called Xilhua, or the architect, built an immense pyramidal tower which was to reach heaven, but the gods offended, destroyed it with lightning. Here is a complete jumble of the ancient mythology. The 4,800 are the 8 cycles before Christ. The architect is the megalistor, or the name of God made into the giant, and is Zialhua, the self-existent X. Why do you think that symbol is so important? The self-existent. You are self-existent. You are the X. You are both in one. Man, yo, you gotta understand how it really works. Who you really are. The matter and the non-matter. The tower is the exact model of the Tower of Babel, as given in our old histories. After its destruction, it was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, the god of air. This is Saka, or Indra, whom we found crucified in Nepal. The Mexicans chanted the word Hululaez, which belonged to no Mexican dialect, to the honor of their gods. This is evidently the Alleluia of the Greeks and Hebrews, and the Ulalu of the Irish. Number 6. It is said that after the deluge sacrificing commenced, the person who answers to Noah entered an ark with 6 others, and that soon after the deluge, his descendants built the Tower of Tulon, Cholula, partly to see what was going on in heaven, and partly for fear of another deluge. But it was destroyed by thunder and lightning. The story of sending birds out of the ark, the confusion and dispersion of tribes, is the same in general character with that of the Bible. His lordship says, in attempting to explain how the Indians could have become acquainted with events of such remote antiquity coeval with the foundation of the earliest monarchies, it would be absurd to suppose that their annals and native traditions extended backward to a period unknown to Egyptian, Persian, Greek, or Sanskrit history. Absurd as it may be to suppose this, their hieroglyphic annals evidently do thus extend backwards. So what you gotta understand is that everything originated here in America from what I'm seeing and what everybody else is seeing, and then it spread out to the rest of the world after a cataclysm, right? But apparently people were still here and survived. There's no doubt about it, you dig? They spread out across the world, you feel me? And as they spread out, they forgot about where they originally came from. They made what they made, imitating and getting greater from where it originally started in North America, right? And they got greater and greater in their things, but forgot where they truly originally came from in the first place. But America was always here, you know? America was always here, the birthplace of it all. That's what I'm thinking. His lordship says, the difficulty of comprehending the plan of the Tower of Belus, given by Herodotus, vanishes on inspecting the plans of the Mexican temples. The turrets in the great temple described in were 360 in number. Up to the temple Cholula, The brick base of the Tower of Cholulan, which remains and was built in order to escape another flood if it should come, is 1,800 feet in circumference. It is said to have been destroyed by a stone from heaven. It is pyramidal. Humboldt says it is hollow. I have little doubt that the word Chol has been XL 650, a monogram, which, it may be remembered, is found in the oldest catacombs at Rome. Teocalli is the name of the temple of Cholula. This is said to be the house of Teocalli. This is evidently Teo, or God, Kali. This is evidently Teo, or God, Kali. House of God is precisely the Hebrew style. The word Cholula is thought by Lord Kingsborough to be a corruption of the word Jerusalem. He thinks the same of a place called Chorola, but I suspect that they were identical. At Cholula is a very large temple, with the very celebrated pyramid, which is said to be a very close imitation of the Temple of Belus or the Tower of Babel. A room in one of the pyramids of Cholula has its ceiling formed like the Temple of Kolmilmar, of overhanging stones. Now, in volume 21 of the Classical Journal will be found some interesting remarks of Mr. Favors on the close similarity between the pyramid on the mountain Cholula of the Mexicans and the Tower of Belus. That one is a copy of the other, and that they are both taken from some common mythos cannot possibly be doubted. This being premised, I would ask my reader whether he can doubt a moment that the well-known deity Omorka of the Chaldeans is the Homeo god of the Mexicans. Thus, we have not only the mythos of the Greeks and Bacchus, of Christianity, of Judaism, of Tartary, and of North and South India in Mexico, but we have the very oldest mythos of Babylon. How come this mythos of Babylon be in Mexico? How came it? Do you understand? Do you see what everybody is understanding in 1836, everyone?